Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Keith, for having me here to speak today. I realise that I am the only thing that's standing between you and the next tea break, so I'll try and bring us back onto time, because I realise I've started a little bit late. The bad news is that I work for a construction contractor, and we're not famed for finishing anything on time, so I will try my best, but I can't promise anything. I do want to tell you a little bit about Wates Group to start with. We've been around for a little bit over 125 years now. We recently, a few years ago, celebrated our 125-year anniversary. We are a privately owned company, now owned by the fourth generation of the Wates family. And we cover areas such as construction, residential development, property services, maintenance across the UK. We, a couple of years ago, launched our new purpose, which is reimagining places for people to thrive, and we want to be a purpose-driven organisation. Last year, we had a record turnover year for us, hitting 2.4 billion, so we're sort of getting larger and larger year on year as an organisation. And we have about 6,000 colleagues who work for us. So as a construction contractor, sort of one of the bigger ones in the UK. What we do is that we develop, we build, and we maintain buildings for various clients, private sector and public sector. So new build, refurbishment, maintenance, across that scope of things. We do a lot of work in the social housing sector as well, so we look after hundreds of thousands of properties for different local authorities around the country, and hopefully make their tenants' lives better. We're split into 5 main business units. So we have a land and development arm who buy land and look to develop mostly housing on it, but increasingly commercial property as well. We have a residential business, so we do high-rise and low-rise residential properties. Our construction business covers things like commercial properties. We're doing a large battery plant up in the northeast at the moment. Data centres we're increasingly getting into, so we're trying to sort of keep up with the current trends that are going on across the country at the moment. SES is our mechanical and electrical division, and WPS is our property services division, so all of our facilities management and the maintenance that I was alluding to earlier. So, to set a bit of context for what I'm talking about today, I'm going to talk about 3 numbers that are important to us at the moment, and that is 72, 21% and 1.5%. And I'll explain what each of those mean, because you're probably thinking, what is he on about, putting 3 random numbers up on the screen? So the first one is 72. And this is the number of deaths that happened in the Grenfell Tower tragedy back in 2017. So just after midnight, a lot of you might remember it, just after midnight, a fire broke out in this 24-storey building in West London. 70 people died at the scene, and 2 further people died in hospital later on. It was caused by an electrical fault in a refrigerator, I believe on the 4th floor of the building. And there was a rapid spread of fire throughout the building, where the fire managed to get through cavities, gaps around windows into cavities behind the facade of the building, and spread up the building rapidly. The result of this, aside from, of course, all the tragedy at the time, was that there was a public inquiry and new legislation was published, which was the Building Safety Act 2022. Now, this is one of the most significant things that's happened to the construction industry in the last 100 years. It's profoundly affected the way that the industry runs and the way that the industry thinks about things. And what it has also done is bring into focus the fact that the construction industry, compared to a lot of other industries, which I'm sure a lot of you in this room are involved in, was actually quite poorly regulated at the time. And so this legislation has brought in the establishment of a regulator, the Building Safety Regulator, currently run under the remit of the Health and Safety Executive. But equally, it's brought in requirements in legislation now, tighter requirements around compliance with building regulations, around making sure that our people and the people who work for us are competent, around making sure that we have full records of the buildings that we are building and handing over to our clients, and establishing a set of gateways to pass through. So before this legislation was in place, it wasn't a complete Wild West out there, but it wasn't anything like as good as it should have been and as good as we need to be as an industry. The second number I wanted to speak about was the 21%. And that is, if you take the whole total costs on a project, on a typical construction project, and this is based on some research that was done back in 2016, 21% of those costs on the project are wasted on errors, which is a massive number. So 5% of those are direct costs of errors. So if we have some defective works on one of our sites, we have to go and fix it. That's 5% of those costs. But when you factor in indirect costs, delays, the knock-on effect on subsequent trades coming in to carry on work, that increases to this 21% number. So that's equivalent to about £7 billion per annum across the construction sector in this country alone, which is a massive number and something that isn't sustainable for us as an industry. And for Wates, that's probably around £120 million a year that we're wasting on fixing errors. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be able to tackle all of this in one go, but we have to do something to address this problem. Causes of these errors are varied. There was a list out of this research of 20-odd causes, I think, but some of the key ones for me are a lack of focus on quality, poor management and planning of our projects, poor design and design coordination, a lack of competence among a lot of people in the industry, commercial pressures, which I'm sure will echo among a lot of you across various industries, and late changes. So our response to these late changes coming in is really causing us problems. And this is something that we need to address. The final number that I want to talk about is 1.5%, and that is the Wates Group's profit margin last year. Now, construction typically has a very low margin anyway, but the typical average in the country is about 3.9%, and that's the lowest in the world in the construction industry. Now, our margin of 1.5% last year is obviously lower than the average, and that is not a great result. So even though we had a record turnover year, it wasn't a great year for making money. This is something, again, that we need to address, and some of the causes of this are things like the errors that I was talking about before, but also material and labour costs, shortages in skills, data management, poor quality. So this is something that we are struggling with as an organisation and we are struggling with as an industry. None of this is secret, by the way, so this is all published on our website, so it's not I'm not telling something you can't take away and talk about if you want to. We need to get better. So how are we tackling this and what are we doing as part of the project that I'm here to tell you about today? There are a lot of projects that are going on in our business at the moment looking at these issues that I've just spoken about. But one of them, and the one that I'm working on with our partners at P4L at the moment, is looking at our management system, and we call that our operating framework. So it's currently certified to the ISO standards you probably expect, and a couple more that are sort of a bit more industry specific. But we have some problems with that at the moment as it stands. It's spread across 3 different SharePoint sites for historical reasons, makes it very difficult for us to manage it. It makes it very difficult for us to deal with duplication of a lot of documents and processes across them. And those documents and processes add up to about 3,500 across those 3 systems. So it's a lot for us to look after and a lot for us to make sure that the right people out there in our businesses are picking up the right things. Currently, even though I said earlier I realised that we have 6,000 employees, we've actually only got about 4,000 users of this system. We've recently bought another business, which is where the other 2,000 came from, in case you were thinking my maths wasn't adding up. But our management system was launched about 10 years ago, and it's not really kept pace with what we need to do. And I think it's a fundamental part of some of the problems that I was speaking about earlier. So our users, we went out and asked them, and they were saying, well, look, it's difficult to navigate. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not sure which process I'm supposed to be following. It's not clear for me in my role what I'm supposed to be doing. And that, of course, has a knock-on effect into reduced compliance with our system and with the subsequent legislation, British standards, other things that we have to comply with. And that makes a big risk for us as a business. Project reviews as well often lack looking at the critical path and the process compliance checks telling our management and our leaders how things are going on their projects. And so it's quite difficult for us to assess with any level of accuracy what the margins are going to be on our projects, look at the risks, and those sorts of things. So it is something that we definitely need to look at. This programme, as I mentioned earlier, is one of a number of things we're looking at the moment. There's a big bit of work going on around defective work specifically, and other things about causes of error that we've got in the business at the moment. But this needs to be a transformational programme for our business. And this is why we're working with these experts in the room here to help us make that happen. So last year we went out and we surveyed our users. They were telling us that the current system is too complicated. We can't navigate it. I can't see what it's telling me to do in my role. And I'm not getting the training that I need on this system. And some of the things that we need to tackle there are things around how do we make sure that we get people to the right information at the right time? And how do we get rid of the duplication and confusion in that system? So we started this project off by defining our objectives. Now, we used the Hoshin-Kanri method for this, which is something I wasn't familiar with before we started this project. I don't know whether anyone else in the room is familiar. You're probably all going to say, yeah, we use it on a daily basis. It was something I wasn't familiar with by any means. But essentially, we have to establish our breakthrough objectives, and then we break them down as it goes around the chart. And I'm sure in one of the breaks, if you want to catch me, I can try to explain a bit better to anybody who's got any questions how it works, and I will do my best to do so. But our 4 breakthrough objectives then were create an operating framework that users embrace. And that's quite difficult, isn't it? Because management systems in a business, it's not exactly the most thrilling subject. How do you make users embrace your management system? Quite tough. How are we going to improve business performance via compliance with our processes and making sure that we have metrics in place to tell us what that compliance level is? How are we going to sustain productivity gains by making sure that the efficiency and the effectiveness of the system and the processes within it is there? And finally, we wanted to make sure that we were using available technology to improve user uptake and experience. This wasn't supposed to be a project where we go out and buy an off-the-shelf product and just build something into that. We are taking our existing system, we're using technology that we've got in the business at the moment to display that back to our people. So some opportunities and key success metrics for us. We've got a real opportunity to simplify what we're doing. We've got to reduce that admin burden on people so that we can free their time up to actually get out there onto our project sites and actually see what's going on rather than sitting at a computer and filling in forms. We've got to use it to drive organisational growth and make these systems more user-friendly and efficient, because if they're not user-friendly, people aren't going to use them and they're going to be out there doing whatever they want. Now, I don't want to suggest that our people come to work and want to just do whatever they want, do a bad job or whatever. People want generally to do the right thing at work, but we've got to help them do that by telling them what that right thing is and making it easy for them to access. So success is going to look like a framework that's embraced by users, as I said, a stronger, more consistent and repeatable business performance. We want, if we deliver things in a consistent way, we should be able to repeat that performance on our projects. Higher productivity and fewer errors through that business performance. Enhanced adoption using smart technology. So it was the current systems based on, well, it's effectively a SharePoint library that people access. Not very dynamic, not very easy to find what you want. There's a few filters on there, but it's not great. So we've done a lot of work looking at how we're going to make that more accessible to people, but still within that remit of using what's available in the business. We want to make sure that there is continual improvement driven by the metrics that we're seeing and by user feedback, so that we're always looking for improvements in what we're doing. And finally, that improved operational efficiency and compliance with regulations and legislation. The fines for not complying with the Building Safety Act, which has now been enforced for a couple of years, are quite significant. And actually, there is also a personal liability under it for people in our business as well. So, you know, we have directors in the business who could potentially end up in prison if we're not complying with that standard, which is causing some people a great deal of concern, as you can imagine. So part of this is supposed to help that not happen. So key success metrics for us on this project: make sure that we have compliance with those regulations and the gateways. We're streamlining our workflows with less duplication. So we are reviewing absolutely everything. If you think back to that slide I had about the number of documents in the system, 3,500, every single one of those is going through a review process with the relevant experts in the business. That takes time, but as I'll talk about, we found a way to make that flow through the process. We want clearer processes, and we want, at the end of the day, our users telling us that actually this system is better than what was there before. Because if it doesn't work for them, then it's not going to work for anybody else. So some benefits for the business: simplicity, clarity, and improved performance. Key for me, sharing lessons learned. We're typically not very good at that. I don't know, this might echo with some of you in the room. Some of the lessons learned that we get from projects, things that have gone well, things that haven't gone well, get kept at a very small silo in one part of the business or in a region and don't really get spread very well. That's something we need to tackle, and we need to make sure we reflect that in our processes when they get updated and go back out there. We are introducing a set of internal stage gates. So at the moment, our projects go through 6 stages, and we are keeping those 6 stages as part of this new system, but we're making sure that there are checks in between each stages to make sure that people are happy that the risks have been addressed and that we're ready to move on. We want to make sure that we are quicker and more responsive at improving our processes. So we're not going to sit for months reviewing stuff, consulting with people. We want to make sure that when we're updating things, it's done quickly. We can get those improvements out to the business as soon as possible. And we want to make sure that there's a visibility of that compliance data for people. So we're no longer, well, we will carry on doing internal audits, but of course they are a sample of our projects across the business. We don't go and audit every single project. We want to make sure that we understand the compliance level on every project out there in the business. So what was our original plan? This goes back to last summer. We had a planning phase at the very beginning, which was, I think, around August time, if I remember correctly. And that actually was just a 4-week planning phase. So if you think about the scale of this project we're talking about, a 4-week planning phase for this project seems quite short. But what we wanted to do was make sure that we actually spent as little time as we needed to capture the requirements of this project so that we could start working as quickly as possible and ideally start getting some of the results and some of the value out of the work that we were doing through the mill as fast as possible. So we had a 4-week planning phase. We then went into our second phase, which we broke down into sprints. So I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with the sprint methodology of working on projects. We initially set up 4-week sprints where we would go through and sort a chunk of documentation that we wanted to put through our process owners and subject matter experts. We would then set that in order to make sure, what do we want? What do we want to keep? What do we want to say in there? What do we want to change? And then we wanted to establish the standard. So rewrite the documents into new formats that were more easily accessible by our people. And so we're taking chunks of documents and running them through these sprint cycles, designed to start delivering value very quickly and get started on simple solutions. So we didn't want to sit around waiting forever, basically. And then finally, the original plan was that after each one of these sprints, we would dip down into a third phase, which was to start deploying stuff out into the business very quickly. So we're really getting that value out into the business. So take a 4-week sprint, deploy something, second chunk, deploy it, and so on, until we got through all of those 3,500 documents. What we realized after a period of time was that method wasn't quite going to work for us. And this is where we needed to be responsive and flexible and agile in how we were running this project. So at the end of each one of these sprint cycles, we went through a retrospective session. And some of the things and some of the points that came out of it among the team that we were working with were things like, we need more support. What do we do about that? Well, we need to engage other functions to get their expertise involved. So we realised that we needed to publish this, what was the output of this project, on a new system. We couldn't stick with this old SharePoint site and that was it and nobody could find anything. We had to come up with something new. So we had to engage with our IT function in the business. Well, of course, that meant that we couldn't then deploy stuff every 4 weeks because we were building a new system in the background. So we had to change the plan to make sure that our project was still flowing in the right way. Some other retrospective commentary we had were things like, well, we're not seeing the bigger picture. So we needed to take a bit of a step back and look at, well, we've been very focused on these documents and churning them through and reviewing them and getting them out there, but we're not seeing the bigger side of things. How are we actually going to make this land properly with people out there in the business? How are we going to set up the navigation on the new site? What are the communications that have got to go out with all of this? So we introduced a work breakdown structure using our quarterly planning process, and I'll show you one of those boards we've set up in a minute to show you how we did that. We need to know if we're heading in the right direction. Yeah, we can do all of this work, and we could put it all out there, and everybody goes, well, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't helpful to us at all. So we need to make sure that we built in a cycle of user testing before we got too far down the line and realised what we were doing was all a load of rubbish, which it isn't, by the way. Our regular meeting cadence isn't working, so we established this sort of daily diary. What are we going to do every day of the week? We're going to have stand-ups. We're going to have retrospectives at the end of every sprint. We're going to do planning at the beginning of every week. We needed to make sure that we were keeping on top of that. The right people are not always working on the right things, so we needed to make sure that we gave people the right accountabilities for what they're doing instead of everybody trying to do everything, which was a bit of a, it's not a very efficient use of people's time. And we don't know if we're moving fast enough. How do we know that we're actually going to ever produce something from this project and be able to put it out there into the business? So we introduced some visual metrics to make sure that we could understand that we were getting there and the pace at which we were progressing. So if I go through a couple of the boards that we've set up in the iObea system, which was introduced to us by our partners here at P4L. The first one at the top there, and I know you can't see the detail, of course, on these screens, is our quarterly planning board. So we've broken the project down into now these 4 WBS streams. So we have production of documents, we have the IT and project architecture side of things, we have deployment and governance and the compliance metrics, and then we have general kind of comms and program governance at the bottom. And this was in response to the feedback we were getting from our project retrospectives saying, well, everybody's working on all sorts of bits and pieces, but it doesn't seem to be, we're not using people to the best of their abilities. So we need to break it down, allocate people to those things. And of course, using the iObea system, and I don't know whether everybody here is familiar with it, the cards, each card represents an action, an activity on there. And we were giving people those to be responsible for. We've also, using our sprint planning board there at the bottom in a similar sort of way to make sure that we're planning our sprints effectively, and we're seeing, crucially, the interrelationships and the dependencies between what we're doing, because that's something I felt like we were missing at the beginning of the project. We were doing a lot of work, but we weren't necessarily seeing the knock-on effect of different things. So we've now done a lot of planning around what are the interdependencies between things. And this really helps us because it's focusing us at that activity level. It's giving us that view of what is dependent on what. It's still helping us to move at pace. We are getting through this project very quickly, and a lot quicker than I think a lot of people expected us to at the beginning. And it also drives collaboration because it means we pull together as a project team on a virtually daily basis to look at this and make sure, are we still on track? And is everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I mentioned some progress metrics earlier on. And this gave us confidence that we were heading at the right pace in the right direction. But I think it also gives the senior leadership in our business confidence that we're doing the right thing. It's quite easy for big transformation projects, I think, to sort of rumble along in the background and people ask questions. they get some answers, but perhaps they're, it's not obvious to our sort of executive committee level how a project is going. And this is something that allows us to actually show them that in a visual form that they understand. So whilst our Kanban boards that we were using and we are still using on the iObea system do that, this complements that visual management side of things. We can still see that left to right flow from what we're doing, but it means that it's more understandable for people, and we report on this on a very regular basis to our senior management. So the product itself, and without giving you a walkthrough demonstration of the entire product, we've got a few things on here. Again, might be slightly tricky to see, but we're introducing a high-level process landscape. So I mentioned those 6 project stages that we've got with processes within them, and the stage gates within those to make sure that we are looking at the risks and making sure that those compliance things are done at every stage before a construction project moves on. We're producing process diagrams for those. We're going down to the procedure level. We're rewriting every single procedure that we've got in the business and reformatting it into a swim lane format, which our users have told us is something that they find easier to understand. That's a huge amount of work. It requires all of our subject matter experts across the business to chip in on this. And that has been a challenge at times. We have a very small core team of people working on this project on a 100% of their time basis. I think there's about 6 of us. We're relying on our process owner network around the business to tell us what should be in those processes and procedures. And getting hold of their time when they have a day job is something that's not always easy. And so I feel like driving that collaboration with them was really important. And part of that was to show them the value of what we're doing. Once we got people on board with actually, that works really well, and we're going to get value out of that, and that's going to make my life easier as the process owner for commercial things or for health and safety or operations or whatever it is, then they really bought into this, and they're actually now fully engaged with this. We are getting pretty much as much time as we need from them, which is amazing, considering where we were a year ago when we were struggling to get them into a room with us. And that's been a real change. And we've even people who were notorious for not being very easy to work with in our business are now coming to us, are really engaged. They're going on videos and talking internally about how great this project is and what the output's going to be. So I think we've really turned that around, and by demonstrating that value to them, that's really helped. We are still, of course, all doing this on existing technology that was in the business. Like I said, we're not going out and buying another platform. So we are holding all these documents still in a SharePoint library, but what we had to do was come up with a better way of navigating. And this is something we've developed as we've gone along, as part of the retrospective work that we've been doing, and as part of the collaboration with the different functions in the business. So we're going to be using Power BI, for example, to help show how the system is structured, and that helps us a much more dynamic way of showing things to people, much less admin heavy as well for us when we make updates. We're going to be using Copilot, so we're going to introduce a Copilot agent within our system. People can query it. How do I procure my passive fire protection, for example, and it will tell you. So these are all things which are great for our users, but they're all things that already exist in the business, and it just shows, I think, with a bit of lateral thinking at times, a bit of creative thinking and innovation, you can actually do a lot with what you've got already, rather than having to go out there and buy something off the shelf to start with. We are at the point now on this project where we are about to deploy our first release. So if you remember our 3-phase plan at the beginning, we were going to be deploying something every 4 weeks. Well, that hasn't happened. We're now quite a long way down the line in the project, but what we realized was deploying a small chunk of documentation out into projects is going to be very confusing for them. You know, they've got this small bit of new stuff and then everything else is on the old system. So actually we had to change that as we went through. We're going to be deploying our first major release, which is 2 out of the 6 stages of our project life cycle before Christmas this year. At which point, I'm sure we'll get a lot more feedback from users. Hopefully it will all be good, or at least constructive. Systems that we're using to make sure that it's adopted better, the Page Tiger system, and again, another thing that was introduced to us by P4L, a great product for making sure that there's engagement there, engaging content is created for people. And finally, we want to make sure that we are understanding fully, and everybody's got this full picture of compliance across our business. So no longer is there going to be a lot of stuff happening in the shadows where nobody really knows what happens until they happen to go and do an audit in that area. This is something where we're going to get that full picture out there for the business to enable that increased performance. So what I wanted to do was just go into some key things that I've learned as part of this project. Because, as I said, I wasn't familiar with this sprint method of working just over a year ago. It was new to me. A lot of what we've done on this project has been new to me. Kanban boards, the IOBEA system, everything was something that was completely new to me. I think traditional project management was more where I was expecting us to go with this. And at the very beginning, we were thinking, well, why haven't we set all of our requirements out in detail at the beginning of this project? Why aren't our senior leadership saying, well, I want to know when it's going to be done by? We went and presented to them to get a go decision to start this project, and nobody said, when am I going to have the product? And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand this at all. But it's this way of working and this continually developing and learning as we've gone along has really been an eye-opener for me. So some key things I've learned is that we need to embrace change. This is something that we can't nail everything down on day one. When we're dealing with knowledge and making sure that that's translated out there to our users, we are going to be changing on a regular basis how we approach things and what we're saying. And that's something that we can't get away from, and therefore we need to embrace it to make sure we're getting the most out of it. We don't want to be afraid of ambiguity. So again, coming back to not knowing all of your granular level requirements at the beginning of a project isn't necessarily a bad thing. It helps us to make sure that we're more innovative. It means that those conversations happen where people will debate things and collaborate and make sure that we get the right answer that comes out of it. That all seems to come to me from out of that level of ambiguity that sometimes comes out. We want to make sure that we're regularly retrospective. So I say we're doing these retrospectives. We were doing them every month. We're now doing them every 2 weeks to make sure we understand what's working really well on this project and what could we do better. Taking early action. Again, we had a 4-week planning period at the beginning of this project. That didn't feel like very long to me at all. But actually what it meant was that we got into the work quicker and we were actually taking action much quicker. And we were able to then go out to our users and say, what do you think about this? And they could tell us, rather than us not being able to do that for 2 years. And finally, demonstrating value to drive some collaboration. So as I mentioned earlier, we had to work with a lot of different characters in our business. Some people in construction are quite kind of grumpy. I was trying to think of a nice word for it, but people have a reputation of being a bit gruff sometimes, some of these people out there in the business, and actually trying to get them on board was tricky. And what we did is we showed them the value of what we were doing. We persuaded them this is the right way to do things, and that what they were doing was going to add value to their business and the wider group. And actually, they started coming to us. And that collaboration has really been a key part of this project. But it wouldn't have happened if we weren't able to demonstrate value because of the early action that we've taken to those people. So those are my key learnings from this project. As I say, we're about to deploy in Q4 this year, so it would be great if I could come back at some point in the future and tell you how well it's all landed. And if I'm not here next year, then you'll know that it didn't land very well and we had to start again. But thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
We have a roaming mic.
One to the other.
We have a question from Peter. Oh, behind you, Annie. There we go.
So what's your expectation in terms of errors coming down? That horrendous 21%. I mean, you're putting a lot of great things in place. What's your hopes, expectations?
I don't feel like we're going to get, just through what we're doing here, all of those errors disappeared. Errors will happen. But are you asking me to put a figure on it? Because I'm not sure I've got a number for you. A range. I would like to see. I think if our people are complying better with what they're doing, they're following the legislation, they're doing the right thing in terms of design and planning for quality and quality control, I would like to see us certainly be able to bring that down by 10%. That is what I'm hoping for. And like I did mention, there are other projects going on in the business at the moment, so that are looking at very other specific areas of quality. This is sort of the management system side of things. But if it came down by 10%, that would be fabulous. I genuinely don't know. I wish I could tell you, but yes.
Hi. Yes. Firstly, thank you for that. It's great to you could take us through that example. Thank you. Yeah. You talked about demonstrating the value of what you're doing to the SMEs. I guess you talked about the more awkward individuals in an organisation, but could you just expand a little bit more on that, of how you managed to do that? Was it lunch and learns? How did you bring the organisation along that journey, i.e. all of the organisation?
It wasn't so much lunch and learn sessions. This was sort of our process owners and subject matter experts out there who we really wanted their input from, but some of them were more up for it than others, let's put it that way. So the way that we demonstrated that value to them was really just getting them in a room and showing them what could be done. Now, the tricky bit was getting them in the room in the first place, but it was showing them what could be done with this system and showing them the possibilities. So, it's all very well showing people, well, this is a procedure how it used to look like. This is how it looks like in a swim lane format now. And they could sit there and go, well, great, I can understand that a bit better, but, it's much of a muchness sort of thing. It was really getting them to understand what the value would be to their teams out there in the business from that, how that's going to make it easier for people to understand in their role what they have to do. So the way we've laid it out, for example, on those swim lane procedures, is each lane represents a different function in the business, and then every single activity on there has a job title against it. So it's absolutely crystal clear who's doing what. And I think they were getting feedback from some of their teams as, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. To be able to demonstrate to those people, your team is now going to have absolute clarity about what they're doing, is really one of the things that I think they picked up on and really liked as part of that. But also being able to show them that they're now going to have this range of metrics and performance indicators that's going to help them understand how their part of the business is working, where, in the past they're sort of fumbling around in the dark slightly, not really sure, are things going well, are things not going well? They're going to have this full range of things, and it's getting that message across to them that actually they're going to have that visibility of performance that I think really got them on board as well.
I'm just interested in what the team was that put together your initial strategy, and then how did that flow down into your delivery teams?
So the initial strategy was put together by our executive committee sponsor, our program manager, with input from me as well as effectively the product owner of the system. It's something actually that our CEO has insisted that every major project in the business now produces. It's something that he's, really sees the value in from his past experiences in places that he's worked. So the first time I looked at it, I thought, what on earth is this? Getting your head around it was, until somebody explains to you how it works, it was a bit tricky. But and so we obviously thought we might have that problem passing that down to the delivery teams, as you're suggesting. So what we did was we actually, rather than presenting to our delivery teams that Hoshin-Kanri diagram, where they might have the same reaction I did initially, is saying we actually extracted the key information out of that and presented it to them in probably a more expected format they would expect to see it in, more than that big diagram. So that's really how we filtered it down, is to extract the key stuff. So while it still sits there in the background, we're still working to it. We didn't present it to our delivery team in that format. I don't know if that would help, but
With another question in the middle. Who's going to get to them with a mic? Annie? Annie Zeiss. Keep shuffling around.
oh well.
Thank you. Regarding some of the figures you mentioned at the beginning, the 21%, the 5%, there's lots of things you could have done, and perhaps your business is already doing around that. How did you land on this being the thing that we should be sort of putting effort into?
Well, there are other projects going on as well. There's a big project going on around particularly our build quality and quality control side of things and record keeping. But that's very much aligning with what we're doing. You know, none of these projects should be happening in isolation. They're all part of the big picture. And actually, the way I like to see it is that our management system's at the centre of that big picture. So it's something that we knew we had to do. It was the user feedback really that prompted us to do it, I think, in the first place. There's a lot of good content in our current management system, but the problem was that people weren't able to easily get to the content that was relevant for them. And there was a lot of duplication and wasted time and effort built into that. So it was really that user feedback coming to us and saying, this isn't working for me, we don't understand, we need this in a better way, that prompted us to start this project off. And the way we see it is that we need it. It's only fair to our people that they understand what we as a business are expecting them to do. It's not fair to tell them that in a way that they can't understand. But equally, if people out there have an absolutely clear picture of what they need to do, then we sometimes get this feedback in some of our internal audits and things, people saying, oh, I just didn't know I was supposed to do that. That's not going to be a reason for not doing something anymore, because this is going to make it very clear. So there is an element of us driving this to make sure that people are doing the right thing. Not the user feedback was the big bit of it, but from a business point of view, we don't want that excuse anymore of, well, I just didn't know. This is going to make it clear to people and give them the right information at the right time.
Thank you. I think we'll leave it for questions, but matters are around. Oh, have we got one more? If I can't see my hands. Oh, it was right behind the pillar. I'm so sorry.
Apologies for that. Probably on both of those things, and leading up from the strategy and from the choosing what to go at. The feedback loops then so obviously like delivery is a big part of proving strategy. A strategy is a hypothesis, we'll do it in this way and then we'll get these results.
Yep.
Do the people who you've delivered that down to and are starting to change their behaviours in terms of delivering it in a different way, do they see that the feedback loop caused by them taking action, the results of that action then feed back up? And are you able to allow that to learn about, is this strategy fit for purpose? Do you change that in any way because of it?
So you mean the people working on this project, not our sort of construction project teams out there? Is that who you mean?
Ultimately, everybody, but
yeah.
Obviously that might happen in steps, but has that begun to happen in any way? Do you see that happening?
It's certainly begun to happen within our project team. I think in the wider business, because we've gone out there and done some testing with users and showed them what we've got, but we haven't nobody's using it on a live project yet. I guess I can't really speak for the wider business because they haven't really got it yet. But certainly within our project team, you know, the high level objectives and the strategy for this project are still relevant. I think it's the way that we're approaching them and that we're tackling them has changed over time, and that's based on sort of those learnings and those feedback loops that you mentioned. So I think the people in the project team certainly are seeing that we're still achieving what we're supposed to be doing, but in a different way. But that overall strategy for what the project is supposed to be delivering hasn't really changed. It's just the tactics, the way that we are approaching that strategy has been the change, I think.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Well, Matt's going to be around with us all day, so if you have any other questions or you'd like to speak to him in person about his experiences, I say feel free to do so. Is that all right, Matt?
Yeah,
there we go. There we go. So, yes, thank you very much, Matt. That was a fantastic presentation. Round of applause.
Thank you.